You are listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is producer Sarah Labowitz, and we're going to be talking about the new documentary, Texas, USA. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's nice to have you. This is an interesting film. Obviously, it took place in 2022. So I want, just so our listeners know a little bit about what Texas USA is all about. And then we can do a deep dive into the film.
Yeah, well, Texas USA is about democracy and the fight for democracy in a tough place in America, and one of the most iconic states in Texas. So we follow a mix of candidates and organizers throughout 2022, which was a midterm election year. And in the process, we tell a bigger story about what's happening in our country right now. We're talking, you and I, the day after the off-year elections in November of 2023, and like it just feels, more and more relevant. The things that we were filming even in 2022, it feels like we're just building towards that. That story is still building.
Yes, yes. And it's interesting because I watched the documentary the night before the elections, so the off-year election. So I thought about that as I was watching it. Um, how did you get in? This is your first film producing a movie. So let's have the audience, tell the audience a little bit about your background, what you did before you decided to become a film producer.
Yes, so I'm a policy wonk, and I went to school for that, and I've worked in Washington and New York and in and out of government, and really, public policy is how do you get the government to do stuff. And for my whole career, I've worked on democracy and human rights issues, civil liberties issues. So I'm always like trying to figure out how can we make things better for people? How do we get more justice in our society? And I most recently was the policy director for the ACLU of Texas in from 2020 to 2022. And I was in the middle of the Texas state legislature when they were trying to do, they're banning abortion, they were doing voter suppression, making it, easier and easier to carry a gun, all these really difficult things. And we were losing a lot. And I felt like these policy tools that I had been working on my whole career, it was like not enough. The moment needed more. And so I was just like really interested in storytelling, and happened to know director Andrew Morgan. So I called him up. In May of 2021. And I said, I think there's a really interesting story happening in Texas. You should come down. And he did. And then we've been working on this for the next however many years, more than 2 years now.
That's not that long, actually, for a documentary. I just my interview prior to this one was over 7 years. So 2 years seems like nothing.
We
Actually,
hustled,
nine.
like it was not easy to do it that quickly, but we knew that the story was like, we couldn't wait, that the story needed to come out. And so we really hustled to get it done in that timeline.
Yeah, yeah, and it's timely. You have
Yeah, yeah,
it was very timely. Are you live in Houston? Is that correct?
that's right.
Are you a native Texan, or did you transport yourself there?
Yeah, I moved here on the strength of a story. And in 2017, there was an article in Harper's called Letter from Washington. It described what was happening here in Harris County, in the county where Houston is. And it just seemed really interesting. And I was kind of at a crossroads in my own life and like trying to figure out where I wanted to live. And I decided to come down and just sort of try it out for about 6 months, sort of see what it was like to live in a place like Houston, which is big and diverse on a lot of levels, and like has a big economy and is kind of internationally located. There's a lot of like interesting, great things about Houston.
Mhm.
Food is great. And so I tried it out, and that was like 6 years ago. And now I own a house in Houston, and I live here. So
Great. It's great. I know a lot of Californians are moving to Texas, to your
yeah,
area of the
yeah.
world too. So let's talk about the politicians that you followed in this documentary, and then the other wonderful people and what they're doing in Texas, because it's amazing what's going on down there. I have a very, very dear friend who lives in San Antonio, and other friends who live in other places in Texas, and it's a great state, and lots of changes are going on down there, and you're part of that, and this film shows that, the grassroots, because everything change begins at the grassroots level if we're going to make any change at all. So let's talk about why you chose the candidates that you did to highlight in Texas, USA.
Yeah, so one of the things we were really keen to do, and I'd watched a number of films to prepare for this project, and to, a lot of candidate stories, Knock Down the House or The War Room, and even the RPG documentary that came out a couple of years ago. And they sort of centrally focus on a single character. Knock Down the House had a number of characters, but it's really like an AOC film. And the story that I knew about Texas and what was happening here was that it was bigger than any one candidate. Like what's happening in the democracy here, and sort of in the culture, is not just about like one candidate winning or losing. It's really about kind of a movement. And so it was important that we showcase different candidates, and also the organizers who are organizing in community, election cycle after election cycle, not just for candidate stuff, but for issue stuff. So, we have some horse race stuff in the film. We look at Lena Hidalgo is this kind of amazing local government. She's the county judge in Harris County. So it's a county of 4.6 million people. It's bigger than half the states in America. And she just turned 32. She's went to Stanford. She's bilingual. She's an immigrant from Colombia. She's just this image of a Texas politician that I don't think many people hold in their minds, that someone who is young and progressive and worldly is in charge of this really big, important place. And so her story is really important, and her story is made possible in part by the work of Breonna Brown, who runs the Texas Organizing Project, which is a community organizing group here in Harris County and in other cities around Texas. But they organize year round, and to fight for things like paid sick leave and the things that make people believe that participating in the democracy, the voting makes a difference. And that's not just about like whether you elect this one person or another person. It's about like, is the government doing things that are helpful and meaningful in my life?
Exactly. So you followed Lena, but you also followed you highlighted in the film Beto O'Rourke, which who I love, and I just wish she would win something.
Well, and I think that Beto is probably the best known character in the film nationally. Most people in the country who follow politics have heard of Beto O'Rourke, who ran against Ted Cruz for Senate in 2018 and is running against Greg Abbott in our film in 2022. And spoiler alert, he loses both times.
Fortunately.
But I think that that's part of politics, and it was important for us to show that Beto made a big sacrifice in running that race, and the way that he supported what was happening in Harris County, and sometimes changing, the fight that we're in now requires really long-term participation, and like people who are in it, not just because we want to like, I think now we look at politics almost like sports, and it's all about whether your team wins or loses. And what I appreciate about Beto's role in the state and in our film is really about like, what happens when you don't win and you're part of something that's bigger than yourself and part of the long-term change that's happening in a place.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful story. I mean, in that respect, for people to learn from his story and what's happened to him. Let's hope he runs for something else in the state of Texas. I hope so.
Well, what I love about him too is that he's like supporting other people, and so he's block out walking with Breonna, he's supporting Lena, and so there's a kind of, I think, if you're not in the political world, it's easy to think of of politicians, almost like a sports hero or something. And you kind of miss the ecosystem piece that doing things that are big and hard, and especially in this moment in America, like fighting, you know, for like the core of the democracy requires like an ecosystem and a lot of interdependent support.
No question about it, especially in politics. It definitely does. I was surprised to see our first lady, Jill
Jill
Biden.
Biden. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was pretty amazing for Lena, for her campaign. Talk about, how did that happen? How did that transpire?
I mean, I think that what Lena is doing in Harris County has certainly gotten the attention of people nationally, and it was a close race. And the White House wanted to send support, and so we were fortunate to be able to follow along with Dr. Biden as she was in Houston for that day. And we got a lot of footage actually with her in different places around the city, and captured just a really nice moment, I think, in the final film between Dr. Biden, Sheila Jackson Lee, who's a congresswoman here in Houston, who's now running for mayor, and Lena. And it's this image of, kind of female political power too.
Definitely, definitely. So after going through this process, and this being your first film that you've produced, and we'll get into that a little bit more, are you feeling hopeful that this movement can catch, fire even more? And that, I mean, let's go back. LBJ, over
A Texan.
yeah, a Texan, a Democrat, back in the 60s. And I think we always felt Texas was more of a Democratic state. Maybe I'm mistaken. And somewhere along the way, it transitioned and became more of a Republican red state. And I hate red state, blue states. I'm just so tired of all of that too. It gives, again, these labels where, and we label and then they become fixed on whatever, on the person or on the state or whatever it may be. But how do you think that happened? And do you think it can swing back? I mean, based on what you've seen in this last year or two or 6 years and being in the state itself?
I don't know. I mean, I'm honestly like less interested in the kind of horse race of like red or blue or whatever. And I think as someone who like lives here and has been working here, it's more about like some of the fights that we see. Audrey Perez is one of the characters in the film, and they're a trans advocate here, and they're in Austin. And that's less about like the fights that Audrey is involved in are less about like are Democrats in power or Republicans in power. It's like, is the state treating you with dignity and respect?
Mhm.
And that seeing that fight unfold, it to me is like part of the bigger fight that we're all in, which is, you know, it really is about like what kind of country do we want to live in? And Greg Casar, who's another one of the characters in the film, he's was a longtime city council member in Austin, and then now is serving in the U.S. Congress. And he has this line towards the end of the film where he says, we're in the middle of the story, and that's what feels really important to have captured. That the whole country is in a sort of a struggle that I think is unfamiliar to most of us who are alive today about like what kind of country are we going to be. And so I don't know what direction, and in the film we don't try to put our thumb on the scale of like, is Texas going to turn blue? I don't know. But what's interesting to me about our characters is that they're fighting for a vision of American democracy that is inclusive and multiracial, and is not just returning to something like the LBJ. There's a lot of nostalgia in some ways for like an LBJ era or Ann Richards, who was a Democratic governor here. And what I love about the story that our characters tell about themselves is that they're aspiring to something even bigger and more expansive. And like that's the story that was really interesting to me, and I think is really undecided in the country. Like, where are we going to go? What kind of country are we going to be?
And I'm happy to hear that you feel that more and more young people are getting more actively involved in the fight, in the grassroots fight, or just getting more involved in politics in general than than maybe perhaps the generation before them, because I think there was this apathy that took place. The baby boomers were involved, they got involved. I don't know what's happened to them anymore, but I think they're still involved. But then there was another generation that, is maybe perhaps not. And so then we go to the next. I don't know what, everybody's got a name for which one they
Yeah.
are. I don't know what, are they Gen Z? I don't know. The millennia, that they're getting
Yeah.
more actively involved. Are you feeling that too? Because, I got involved very young in politics and, worked on campaigns at a young age, and just felt this civic duty to get involved. But then I think there was, as I said, an apathy that took place, and people felt, oh, the country's fine. We didn't need to get that involved. And I know there's so many things that are on they're taking place that for everybody, I think, on every level, that people are getting more actively involved. Is that just a misconception on my part, or is that true? And that you what you saw when you were doing this film, Sarah?
Well, I mean, I think that certainly I've seen a lot of youth act, like when you try and police what teenagers can read and watch in school, they really care about that. And so we didn't follow the issues around book banning in our film, but when I was working at the ACLU, you see how people become activated by if the state or your school district is trying to control the kinds of information that you're allowed to look at, like that inspires people to get engaged politically. I think the fight um, for workers' rights, the fight for 15, and that inspires young people to join with others and join political movements. The fight for trans rights, those are all really motivating issues. What I like about the film, and this is sort of why I think I wanted to do it, is when we've watched it with different people, and like including like middle-aged people who follow politics but haven't been necessarily super engaged. What I really like about it is that people come out and they say, I really want to, like, this reminds me of something I've really cared about and I want to do something about that. And the film is not prescriptive about, you should register people to vote, or you should join this organization or that organization, or you should fight for this. It's more about a story of the showing what it takes. There's a lot of talk about fighting for democracy. And here we are kind of showing what it takes. And that can mean a lot of different things for different people. So I like, as much as I like the youth stuff and I find that inspiring, I also find the, like, I'm middle-aged and am inspired stuff too.
Good. Let's hope everybody walks away feeling inspired. What
Yeah.
did you decide? Because as you said, you did policy, and you were working in policy, and trying to make changes from the inside, let's say. What made you decide to become a film producer, and yeah, just in general? And is this something that you feel, now that you've done this film, that you want to continue to do others? So let's, yeah,
Yeah.
a bit about that transition.
Yeah, I don't think that I decided that I was going to become a film producer. I think that at some point, like several months to the project, Andrew and I were talking. He said, this is what producers do. And I said, oh, really? um, but I think that, when Andrew and I met in 2013, 2014, I was at the business school at NYU running a center there on business and human rights. And most of my research was on the fast fashion industry and workers' rights in the supply chain for fast fashion. And I wrote a lot of like research papers about that like dozens of people read. And then Andrew made a film called The True Cost. And he and I met in the course of his making the film about that. And he went to Bangladesh, where a lot of my research had been. And like thousands and thousands of people watched that film. And I saw firsthand how that film changed the way that people thought about themselves and what they felt called to do. And I still meet people. I was in New York a couple of weeks ago, and I met someone who was like, oh yeah, I watched The True Cost and now I work in sustainable fashion. And it kind of opened up people to a different way of working, at things they wanted to do, all this stuff. And I think that I've just kind of had that in the back of my mind, and that was part of what caused me to give him a call when I was feeling sort of the most despairing about what was happening in Texas, that there was this like other way of, like, it's not enough to know what we need to do. And that's like fundamentally what policy is about. Is like, what should we be doing? You know, if you care about affordable housing or human rights or whatever it is, like, what should we be doing? What's the best way to do that? And there's this other piece, which is how do you inspire people that we can do something about it? And that is what I think drew me to the idea of working on a film, or asking Andrew if he was interested in the story about a film that I then ended up working on more and more and more and more, and then eventually becoming a producer on. Um, in terms of what I would do next, I still work in policy. That's still very much part of my life. And I, since making the film, it just came out a couple weeks ago, I keep hearing about other people who are making films about what's happening in our democracy, and about elections administrators in Rhode Island, and like voting in Alaska, and like there's this kind of little group of us that are, I think, finding similar sparks in this story of what's going on in America right now. And I'm really interested to know more about kind of where all that goes, and how stories like this one help people form kind of political identity, American identity. So we'll see. I don't know where it's all leading.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had quite a few documentaries that have dealt with politics in many ways. I had Don Porter on for Good Trouble, about
Mm-hmm,
John Lewis,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
and she was on right before he died, actually. So
yeah,
that was very timely, but I've had many others too. And that's one of the reasons, you say that, a documentary can speak to a broader audience. And that's why I do what I do, to give the independent filmmakers and documentarians a voice, a place, a platform for them to talk about their films on a broader level and get the word out there so more people can come see their films. And so it's very rewarding to be able to do that, and help with these different causes. I
yeah.
many
Well,
of.
can I ask you a question? Because I'm curious, like, it felt to me like this kind of instinct, or that, I'd seen the way that film helps people like form memories and identity and all this stuff. But how do you see film affecting people?
Well, I think, well, that's a good question. It's a broad question.
You're an expert.
No, I can't say I'm an expert, but thank you for sure. I've never had the tables turned on me, Sarah, to ask me a question. How can you not, when you watch something? I mean, when you see something like this and you go, you know what, there's something in this that sparks inside an interest again to get more actively involved, let's say, in politics. I know for myself, I made, during the presidential campaign, I made phone calls, to different states. I'm in California. We know how this state goes. So they ask us in California to make calls to other states, and to try to get the vote out in various states. I know I took Georgia quite a bit, during the presidential election in 2020, and then also the runoff election afterwards. So you hope when people watch it, it sparks a conversation and then can light a fire for people to make changes. There's a new film called Common Ground about sustainable farming that's hitting the country like wildfire. And it just makes you, just like you did with sustainable clothing, that we're beginning to become more aware. That's more or less what it is. I think there's a lot of things that people aren't aware of, and a film can make us aware and make changes just with ourselves. With me, that's where it starts. It starts with us as individuals, and that's where it can grow. And then you can maybe, decide to grow bigger and join other groups, grassroots groups, and
Mm.
get more involved in whatever cause it is that you decide that you want to become involved with.
Well, and that's what I loved working with Andrew. Andrew's such a good storyteller. And I think, when you're in the policy world, it's a lot about kind of intellectual rigor. And the film world is a lot about feelings and emotions and storytelling and inspiring people, not didactically, not just sort of saying like, this is what you should think or believe. And it was really special to sort of see the world that I live in kind of refracted through his lens as a storyteller and director. And obviously I knew that he had that because I watched his previous films and like seen the true cost a little bit behind the scenes. But I think that's the thing that I've loved most about this project, is that to see it, it's really different to watch it on the big screen and to see the way that it's shot and the music and the emotion that evokes in people. And it hits really different than reading the news. And I was talking to someone the other day, and she was quoting from a book about painting, and she was saying, that you can't get the news from a poem. And it's like you need both. Like you need the news, you need the policy, you need to know what's what. But the inspiration to jump in and to participate and to feel things about what's happening, that comes from art, from film, from this other place. And it was exciting to be able to bring those two worlds together in this project.
What do you hope people walk away with after watching Texas USA?
I hope that they feel hope, but that it's not a kind of false or cheap hope, that it's grounded in the reality of how hard this is right now. I mean, the hardest piece of the film is the Uvalde school shooting in May of 2022. And it's horrific. And there's no sort of cheap answer to that. And there's no kind of false promise of how hard it will be to build a society where kids don't get shot in their classrooms, And so like the size of the task is so big. And so you want people to be grounded in the reality, and also the sense of possibility that the way that we build a better place is by working hard at it and joining with others, and that feels good and is good and worth trying.
Wonderful, wonderful. Where can people see Texas USA, Sarah?
Apple, Prime, and Google Play.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I wish you much success with Texas USA, and it's been a joy having you on the show, and I look forward to having you back with your next project.
Well, I look forward to that too. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you, Sarah. Have a great day.